So I'd like to invite to the platform and to join in this Jay Polding, application specialist from SolidCAD, Chris Febbraro, visual design specialist, RJC, Reid Poyntz of Revit specialist with Smith and Andersen, Claudio Rabaglino, architect with Turner Fleischer, and George McGrath, virtual construction manager of EllisDon. Now, when we think about the evolution of technology in BIM, conceptually it's been around for over 40 years, and it's only been in the last 10, 15 years that it's had a form of ascendancy. And with it comes a lot of challenges. I think part of what we do now at CanBIM is really kind of push the board out, and we've always looked out at what is the future. So with this panel, we pulled them together because they represent a variety of viewpoints. Now I want you to engage in this discussion. Here's what we have in the handbook. And think of your questions that you might want to ask any one of these panelists, that given that it's existed since 1972, we'll touch on the early origins through to a more in-depth discussion on the latest and greatest technologies being used. What will happen in the future? What products will be phased out? What products and services will be required? And most importantly, what can companies be doing to adopt these technologies more efficiently? We're certainly facing an evolution. Who knows? We might come to know of an expert formerly known as the architect, and they evolve in themselves. But anyway, we'll open it up. So I did say I would get them some questions, but I figured that they're smart guys. They can think on their feet. That's why they're up on this panel. So Jay, I'm going to ask you just to kind of kick things off. And again, everybody, please come up to the microphone with your question. Jay, you've been involved with applications at a variety of levels. Where do you think we'll be in 10 years?
Well, we chatted a little bit about this earlier, and I kind of want a little pie in the sky on this, but actually I feel like I've seen the future. But probably about a year ago, I was working with an architect in the States, and he's actually a Second Life architect. And he was doing a project on there. He does projects on there. And the way that you collaborated was incredible because it streamlined. It's all about communication, right? So, like, for instance, if all of us in this room had to collaborate upon something like, hey, everyone, I'm going to be moving this glass over to here. Is that okay? In an instant, I can get a reaction from anyone on what I'm about to do. Imagine trying to do that even in Revit. First, I got to do it, then I got to email everybody, and I got to wait for them all to get back to me. Well, where is what's in the glass? Where are you moving it? To the right, to the left? But that's the difference between this kind of multiplayer, almost a multiplayer game environment. So anyway, that's one little thing. I'll leave it at that, and there's more. But.
Oh, good. George, from a construction perspective, what would you say is the key evolutionary step that contractors need to make with BIM? What do you think that if there's one thing that is a huge leap, what do you see that as being? I just have to press the button and it'll, yeah.
Okay. A lot of contractors are using softwares like Navisworks, Manage, and Simulate for traditional coordination. Pushing the boundaries from there, people talk about 4D animations and simulations. They're great for marketing, but trying to apply them for your traditional scheduling is a struggle, just because they don't have the functionality to be able to do that type of thing. So managing and tracking progress on site. We're currently doing that on the project I'm working on. We're trying to integrate that within our last planner, if anyone has ever heard of that before. It's a lean method of scheduling. So I think pushing the boundaries in terms of getting the model out and used for that, for managing the workflow on the project on a day-to-day basis. And that's probably not 10 years away. That's next year, the year after that, 5-year window.
Similar to the question posed to Jay, imagine we're sitting here 15 years out. It's now 2028. What do you think as a contractor you got right in 2013?
I would say the way we're collaborating currently at the minute, by using the models, getting the models from our sub-trades, engaging them in the coordination process, and having everyone sitting around the table making decisions about how we're going to put the building together during construction.
Good. Claudio, you and I sort of share about the same genre of architecture. We probably started with MAD, I would imagine, manually assisted drafting, and all the challenges. How do you see this evolution taking place as we move forward?
Well, actually, I started with a pen and paper, and I still use it a lot myself because I'm actually not a BIM user, but I'm a firm believer. I'd like to see actually more interaction between some more consultants. We have a lot of dealings with the structural engineers. There's very little consultant work with electrical and mechanical. So I'd like to see a better improvement on that, which would help a lot in terms of the overall process. I think local government intervention, or involvement, should we say, like in the UK, I think as of 2006, if I'm right, all the government projects have to be in BIM. And I think that would help a lot even here if we did that, just to push the BIM idea further into the public and into the industry.
Good. We think of the evolution of technology in BIM. The consultant community, sub-consultant community we have in the room are the ones that are, I think, facing a huge challenge. So, Chris and Reid, I'd like to get your comments on, given that the traditional role that you've come into within the industry, how do you see that changing, sort of now and in 10 years? Go ahead.
I guess I'll take the lead on this one. Mechanical engineers have already received a little flack today. So, speaking as a mechanical engineer, Revit, it really isn't the best tool for us. Our hands have sort of been forced into using it. So what I see as a better tool would be one that can actually integrate the engineering we do. A lot of it's still pen and paper, using spreadsheets. And all that information gets lost when we put it into a Revit model. It's not the actual geometry of the pipes and the ductwork. That to us is not really engineering. That's drafting. And so what we sort of need is a tool that can combine the engineering we do on pen and paper, have it accessible so that we can go and look back at it later in the design process and use our knowledge, our experience as engineers to be a more effective member of the design partnership, working with architects to better optimize our buildings, our end product.
Chris?
Yeah, I'd just like to, in a way, agree with that, because I think one of the biggest problems facing everybody is interoperability. What are mechanical engineers building in 3D? What are structural engineers building in 3D? And how do they communicate with each other? Revit does an okay job at that today, but I think that in the future, and it was brought up before that, it's going to be in pieces, software that's going to work better for individual parties, and having a common format, IFC does it okay, but having a common format that mechanical engineers can export to, structural engineers can export to, architects can export to, would be key. I mean, we talked a lot today about hands being forced into BIM. It shouldn't be a matter of forcing your hand into BIM. I mean, it shouldn't be a difficult thing. It should be open, and people are going to the reason to get into it should be obvious. And having an interoperable format, interoperable software is going to really help that. We see time and time again, companies can't talk and collaborate with each other because of this simple problem that we have of just file types. So I think in 10, 15 years, we're going to look at, hopefully, better ways of collaborating, better ways of communicating.
So just on that point, I'm going to come back to, and mechanical and structural, you sort of, in the world that I was in before, you guys used to say, once you get the grids and the plan fixed, give us a shout. And we missed out on this huge point. So for anybody on the panel, you know, when we look at BIM as a technology, and we've got other things as the contractual framework and process, do we perhaps, are we trying to use technology like BIM with perhaps processes and procurements that just simply don't work for us? Any thoughts? Reid?
I would agree with you. Even now, the way we use BIM is, again, you know, give us a call when you have the grids and levels set up, and then we'll start. But it would be nice to be more integral to design process earlier on. And no, Revit's not the best tool for that. It forces you into designing, or into, when you make the model, it forces you to make a Revit model. It doesn't really allow you to make an engineering model. And I think that's where it's lacking, is in the schematic design phase. If we were to the problem being is that as an architect, you don't really have a good perspective about what goes into our system design, and it's no fault of yours, it's no fault of ours, it's just the separation between our two disciplines. So I think if we were able to communicate earlier, there would be a benefit. Maybe there's a better tool for that, whether it's comes out of Revit or from a different source. I don't know right now, but
Actually, Jay, you had a...
Yeah, just from a SolidCAD perspective, we deal with lots of different industries. So there's, like the mechanical industry, and by that I mean machines. And someone from our office, he's trying to understand this whole building concept, and he's like, well, why can't you just have this whole model from beginning to end? And really, what it comes down to is the architectural process has a lot of different vested interests. So the architect model done in Revit is done for a specific purpose, a specific end, whereas that end may not meet the model needed by the builder or by the fabricator, let's say. And that's why design build offices have so much of an advantage with this technology, and because they can kind of share the interest of that. I'll just leave it at that. Maybe there's other thoughts on that.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, he mentioned it before too, and Revit's, it's good for one thing, and people have different interests, and they have different jobs to getting a building built. So I think BIM, I mean, it should encompass everybody's preference for software. The misconception often, I mean, when we started looking into BIM, even at our office, was, BIM means Revit. That's not the case. And compartmentalizing different softwares and making sure that they talk well to one another would, in a way, solve that problem. Because, like you had mentioned before, architects have they have certain things that their software needs to do. Mechanical engineers, structural engineers, they maybe want more of an analytical model. Why does Revit, for example, have to do all of this? I mean, right now, the way I look at it, I mean, it does some things really well. Most things not that great. So, I guess I'll leave it at that.
Well, just a thought here, but could it be that Revit was designed around the way the architectural industry works? I know it helps us a lot. I think we have people who would never go back to CAD when we have a project coming in, and it's in CAD because it was an existing building, and no one wants to work in CAD because they're so much more comfortable in Revit. Now, I know that we have no real concerns with the structural models. We work with Reid, Christoffersen a couple of jobs now, and structurally it doesn't seem to be a problem. Maybe that's got to do with the actual software itself, and maybe the development of the mechanical software isn't as advanced. Could be. I can understand how there could be issues and some concerns with that, but the whole thing that the Revit model, when it comes to BIM, you can really see where the interferences are. And in many situations, we've got projects where, had it not been the fact it was in Revit, we wouldn't have caught some of the problems that we'd have had in underground parking and beams and stuff that's interfering with each other. So maybe it's a question of involvement of the actual software itself to help the other consultants.
So just going back to this thought, Chris and Reid, you bring up an excellent point. George, when you think about what you receive as a contractor, you just heard Chris and Reid say that they would be more comfortable if they were producing calculations and analytical models as opposed to hard-edged things. How do you see that integrating in with what you do as a contractor?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and give our contracts perspective on what has just been said. Subtrades that we work with, they don't use Revit. Revit isn't the tool that they use. It's not conducive to what their workflow is. A subtrade, advanced subtrades are using the models that they produce to take off their quantities and produce spooling drawings and go CNC fabrication. So that's where they look from. So to them, BIM isn't Revit. That's, so what you're talking about, engineering models, it depends on the level of information that you get from them. I don't know, a lot of those calculations and things like that, they're specifically design related. A contractor doesn't have any input in that type of thing. So that type of information been passed to the contractor. I don't know what value it would really have because we're not designing the building. We may be optimizing a design and trying to coordinate their design, but ultimately they will be making the design decisions.
I'd just add a point to that. Right now, Revit doesn't really allow us to transition from a engineering design type model to a contractor constructability model. And a lot of that comes down to having to produce 2D documentation. So having to produce a floor plan showing, to go for tender, basically to show everything for pricing. So I think a tool such as Revit, if it were to have, not only the 3D modeling for large equipment, large ductwork, large piping, which we would draw as a design consultant, but also have 2D drafting tools to draw the smaller piping connections, which your subcontractors would go in and model accurately using their tools that they already use that they consider BIM. So if we were able to sort of transition it a little neater, it would, save us a lot of struggle trying to draw all the small diameter piping and smaller things that basically it's not really our decision exactly how they get routed anyways. It's more of a constructability thing. So I think that could be an option.
Yeah. Well, subtrades that we work with generally, well, they all do it anyways. They won't take a Revit model and use any information from that Revit model. They'll redraw everything. So they'll bring the essentially 2D drawings that were produced from Revit and bring them into their design software, whatever they're using it, and develop a model in 3D. They'll use the model, the design model as reference. If we get a design model, we'll bring it into Navisworks and we'll use that then as the base model for coordination. But they're not using your ductwork. They'll be
I know
doing it yourself, right? So they bring it to that heightened level of detail. What you're talking about, fittings and small pipe, they will model that themselves in their own software.
Right, and right now there's no way for that communication to happen because it's not established at the beginning of a project. So, we get to the phase where the job's getting tendered and say we give you our model, you're not going to use it. And that, for me personally, after having put effort into a model and not having that information transitioned to anybody and having it not used is a shame, really.
Yeah, it kind of seems like it just kind of defeats the purpose of BIM in the first place. I mean, that's, from what I gather, that's one of the main advantages is that you're supposed to have this open communication between trades where, the model that's done by one person can be recycled and not retraced upon for the next one. It is a shame.
And it all comes back to the interoperability and the limitations of the software and how they talk to themselves.
Yeah, and it just seems really silly because, I mean, we have so many people are so talented and they're so good at what they do, but we're all stuck on a file format. That's the reason why it's not being utilized to its full potential, and it really is a shame. So.
Thanks, Chris. So I'll get Jay to kind of close out this line of discussion, and then we'll jump to Ian on his question. Jay?
Ian's been waiting. He probably has something more interesting.
Ian Trudeau from Intuitive again. First of all, I'm hearing points that I agree with from everybody. Interoperability, usefulness of design models for the contractors. These are the items we need to resolve to move forward, I think. And I think it comes down to, somebody said, the fact that we're converting all this data-rich information and flattening them out into plans to form these traditional documents. We're investing so much time in our models, and then we throw it away, I think, when as soon as we focus on a drawing. We all get these time constraints. P3 project's a perfect example. We are very crunched for time. And the sooner we can get rid of the whole idea of delivering drawings, the sooner we can focus on creating models that are useful. But I think there are things we can do now before these contracts happen or whatever. I think there's things we can do now. And I think we have to take it upon ourselves to master the tools we use instead of letting the tools master us. So we need to understand the APIs of these tools. We can make them talk ourselves. We don't have to rely on software vendors and that sort of thing to do this. We can make, our structural analysis package work with Revit. We can make it work with Grasshopper. We can make it work with Tekla. We can control that sort of interchange, and we can save time within our own office so we can focus on the model. And then the drawings become a byproduct. So there are things we can do now. And then, at the end result is a contractor-ready model that has, all the structural forces embedded in there, stud counts, everything's in there that, your fabricator can use. So they don't throw away our model. They don't necessarily use the geometry, but the information that's in there, they can use that. And then, produce their own model if they wanted to. But at least it's not a complete throwaway. So
That's an excellent point, Ian, and that's, I think, the challenge that I'm sort of hearing from the board is, from this panel today. One of the things that I've always imagined is we've got a room full of incredible people, talented. We've got owners, we've got contractors, vendors, you name it. What would happen if we all suddenly developed amnesia, but we were gifted with the skill that we worked in and the technology that's available to us today? Do you think we'd build differently? Jay?
Yeah, I think to your point and also to Ian's point, talking about the future, I thought we were going way ahead, but if you're only talking the next few years, I see boutique programming as being very, very big component. Like Ian said, we need to master the tools. The API is getting more and more open. And we just actually at the Ontario Revit User Group, we just had an ex-programmer from Revit speak. And he talked about how things are developed in Autodesk. And he's went out on his own now and he started to develop these, I call it boutique, but it's like this firm needs to do this with the model. So that's what they do. They're not talking about selling the product or marketing it. They just need to do this. It's repeatable. So there is that programming. There is a real, it's already starting in the States to a large degree with this boutique programming.
I don't think, I think that is really important, and, when people get into architecture and engineering, maybe more so engineering, because I do think there are required courses in it, but you don't think you're going to be a computer programmer. And just based on what we've seen today and some of what can be done by just learning some programming languages, C#, .NET, whatever, it's opening up, using the APIs of these programs, and like was mentioned before, writing our own in-house software is going to be incredibly important, and it'd be great to do that. But I just don't think that now, I don't know how many architecture engineering firms have someone, just a programmer. not even a drafter. I don't think that's very commonplace. Maybe that's what we have to do going forward, is that, a position needs to be opened up for this person who's in-house and works on these processes. Because, whatever you pay this guy, I'm sure you can save that in time.
It's an excellent point. When we think of this change, as a friend of mine, we share the same view that the expert formerly known as the architect, that we may not have that term. So having people like we saw today present in your organization 10 years out, we should be going after the 13-year-olds right now, because all the 12-year-olds have been hired.
Yeah.
So I think that speaks to education, and an excellent point. Yes, your comment.
David Villeneuve from AEC Resource. I think the utopian view is great, but there's three big issues here. There's liability, there's discipline ego, meaning mechanicals don't like electricals. I see that on the major projects I'm working on. The biggest one, though, is government. And that's why you need, the BIM councils to be pushing that, because, the San Francisco Bridge is a perfect example. When that was first built, there was 3 government agencies that allowed that bridge to be built. There's 22 involved now, and it's still stymied. So there's a reality that until government changes your contracts, until you can play nicely without suing each other's asses off, and until ego gets out of the way so that you can do that, this is a lovely concept, but we're so far away till we get those other situations in place. And I'm not trying to throw water on a fire, but it's a reality of life, and I see it all the time. So just something I wanted to throw out there, and maybe you can comment.
Well, I think one of the things is, I'll get the panel's comment, but David, we live in the cult of the architect. I teach in Calgary, and one of the things I teach the 4th year class is that 90% of all buildings don't involve an architect, so guess what? You're not a value proposition. Of the remaining 10%, there's about a fraction less than 1% are the museums and art galleries and everything else. You're going to be swimming in a red lagoon with sharks that are feeding. So drop the ego and move on. And I think that's part of the evolution that we have to face. There's some good comments. Claudio, you've been around as long as I have. David's comment about those changes, what do you think?
Well, I don't think you'll ever get away from ego. I think that's something that's, I hate to say it, in the architectural profession, I'm afraid it exists. Getting sued is something else that's you're never going to get rid of, because that's where a certain profession makes its money. Government involvement, well, that's what I was alluding to before, that in some countries it's, I think in the States as well, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you do government projects, then you have to use a BIM format. Our company works mainly with developers, and the biggest problem we have is selling our tool, the Revit tool, the BIM tool, to these developers who may not be as sophisticated or may be looking more at how much money they can make out of selling the building and so on. And sometimes I think it's more in the public rather than the private sector that I might be wrong here, and I invite some feedback, that it's more in the public sector that BIM and Revit might be more accommodated. I don't know if there's any comments on that.
Mike with Planet Measuring. We work in the in the built world, and we build BIM models of existing buildings. That's what we do. And I just hearing from all you guys about how you're not interoperating between each other, and there's problems with formats and all that. We actually pick off the pieces that you guys produce, and we put those into our models. And we can do that by, as you guys have been talking, build those little scripts to make the pieces work with each other. So we're almost like garbage pickers. We'll go through and we'll find out little pieces to recreate the buildings in the built world. And it's a shame that it is so hard to get the information from the various professions, to get that information to create those models. I'm just sort of hoping that councils like this will open up this world to be more collaborative because I think that's the whole idea of BIM. And I don't think you have to, stumble over the idea that you can't talk to each other, because you can. It's actually not that difficult to create those little scripts to talk between each other. And I think the building owner, we're pushing it from that end. The building owner does want all this information. They just can't use it. Once we create a Revit model of the building, there's no way to kind of interact with that building as the building owner. They would like to be able to talk to all the communities through their model, but it's just not at that point now. So I guess my point is, it would be great if everyone could kind of collaborate to come up with this user-friendly building owner BIM that all of you guys can sort of talk together and contribute to in the end.
Just in our travels between different offices, we're seeing a trend even on the small scale of different design teams coming together. So I don't really want to name names here, but like even a small architect will partner with a structural, and then they'll say together, hey, let's buy this small mechanical firm. And this happened. There was only a few people in it, but they bought them, and now they're presenting their front as we're a unified front. To the client, we can do it all, basically. And they have to be strategic in the way they use it, but maybe the mechanical person won't model the ductwork and things like that in that scenario. Maybe the engineer won't, but within the office, within their interest, yes, they do that. So I've been seeing that trend as well.
It's an interesting proposition to have almost like boutique, multi-discipline firms.
Yeah, we're seeing that.
Good point. So George, you heard David's comment about the three key things from your perspective. A huge risk when a contractor comes on board and takes on these projects. How do you see that being mitigated?
We've spoken about interoperability, and if we got our models to work and talk to each other and we received a model from you, one of the biggest hurdles that we would have would be reliance on that information. And you mentioned contract, and until the models can form part of the contract documents, then I think there's always going to be an issue. As it is, contract documents are 2D drawings, and that's what everyone knows, and that's what you'll be held liable to use in all cases. You'll always have to refer to the contract documents, even though you're coordinating in 3D, you have to refer to the contract documents because it's the contract. And until the model forms part of the contract, then there's always going to be a limit to the amount of value or use you'll get out of it,
Yeah, I would.
So just taking that point on let's imagine for a moment that yesterday was the last day we all used drawings. What would we be doing different tomorrow? What would be our day one without drawings to any one of you?
Probably be having more meetings, and yeah, collaborating much more often than where we are in the past, or where we have been. And yeah, I think if we all had to use a 3D format, I think more emphasis would be put on developing these channels of communication and interoperable formats, for sure.
Jay?
I'm just going to go back to that multidisciplinary point again to this end. Just was dealing with a builder, self-performing, and I was talking about their drawings, and they said, well, these certain things don't really matter to us because we're building it. So they build it. So in a world without drawings, it might be the builder executing it, and because they're not demanding a certain type of drawing or a certain way that it has to look, they're just getting what they need to build it.
Good.
Further to that point, though, I mean, maybe the reason why it's, we're still looking at 2D documents isn't because of, everything that happens in the design process. It's when it's built. I mean, what's the person on site when they're building it? What's he gonna look off of? He's probably gonna look off a 2D printed piece of paper. So until that, everything that happens on site can be also brought into this 3D future, maybe that's just an unfortunate aspect, and we were stuck in 2D because that's the lowest common denominator.
So assuming we're out of 2D and take that point forward, Claudio, I'll get your comment, but I'd like to hear from Reid and George on life without 2D. Well, you heard Chris just mention, George, his comment about 2D on site, what would happen. So get you to think of that while we get Claudio's comment.
Well, we and I'm quite sure most architectural firms would probably agree, I hope. We design mostly in 3D. We start off with another program, which I don't want to say, but it's because it's quicker. I'd love to see Revit to be able to do the initial schematic designs like we actually use SketchUp, but I think we do design from the very beginning in 3D, and we use Revit and SketchUp 100% of our new jobs. So I think in terms of an architectural office, the Revit model is really important to us. Like I said, maybe Revit is more directed towards an architectural profession, but we rarely go into 2D. Even some of our construction drawings will have a 3D part to it to show how stairs work or how some complicated areas might be put together, which you might share with a contractor. So that's what I find. I think Revit for us has been extremely useful. It has got its setbacks because it obviously needs to be perfected. Maybe in the next few years it'll happen, but 3D is what we use. 2D is just because we have to print it.
Good. So, Reid, just get your comment, and then we'll jump to George on his thought.
I think like every day at work, personally, everything's in 3D. Whenever I think about drawing a single thing, it's always in 3D, and having to put it down on a piece of paper is just a way to share with others, whether it be the contractor or whether it just be someone else at your firm where you're trying to communicate an idea to them. And you need to be able to draw it out. So I don't think it's so much about the 2D or 3D. I don't think 2D drawings are a bad thing. I think they're a really good way to communicate, especially schematic ideas, which is the backbone of all the systems that we design. Everything comes from a schematic. So whether or not we take the time to leave it like that, or to continue on and then express it in a 3D sense, getting closer to where it is going to be when it's actually in the building. So I think we just need to decide where we stop as a design consultant and where the contractor picks up and continues on using their expertise when it comes down to actually installing the systems. So,
George?
I think we're doing it already. We are using the models as much as we can. During our trade coordination meetings, the whole meeting is centered around the model. The model is projected on the wall. The trades will have their CAD operators, and a senior superintendent or a foreman will be there, and we'll be reviewing issues, trying to resolve things. They may have a 2D drawing in front of them, but it's only for taking notes, so they can take back and update the model. At our OAC meetings, again, all our interference issues that we're trying to resolve is centered around the model. We'll project it on the wall, and we'll discuss it and see can we come up with a solution. And it's been pushed out to the field. We are currently looking at rolling out kiosks where the model gets pushed out onto the job site with a big screen TV, so that the trades can use it for their layout. Trades they traditionally use 2D layout drawings. That's what they've always used. But if they do have issues, they will come to the office. They go to their own offices where they would have Navisworks Freedom loaded on their computers, and they can look at the model in 3D to assist, and so they can understand what they're trying to install if it gets complex.
Good, thank you, good point. Yes?
Yeah, Brian Gauthier from Imaginate Technologies. I'm curious on the panel's views on the evolution of project delivery and move away from traditional project delivery models into things like integrated project delivery, and if that'll help with sort of the limitations that you see right now in the technology in terms of the way that you collaborate.
For integrated project delivery, I think you'd have to have what I was getting at, I think you need to have all the disciplines working on this model efficiently. And like I still believe that some of the software may not be as useful to some of the other disciplines as it is to structural and architectural. But to get a good IPD, I think you have to have all the disciplines, well linked together. And maybe that's where we've got to push our efforts.
Chris and Reid, your comments on IPD?
I haven't yet worked on an IPD project, but I have had some experience on a project where the whole team was working within the same Revit model. So, the architectural walls, the electrical conduit, the mechanical pipes, they were all in the same model. It was a smaller project, so there wasn't that issue of model size. Some of the nitty-gritty details weren't as big of an issue because the project was so small. But it was an interesting concept, and sort of a gutsy move by the architect to support that kind of project delivery. But I think with that, you do get closer to being able to provide just, hand over a 3D model and forget about the 2D documentations. But I think on larger projects, there's just issues of the economy. How do you effectively tender a job when everyone has to be on board from day one? So that's the problem.
Chris?
As far as that tendering, about a year ago, I had an opportunity to go to California to one of these. I guess it was a BIM kickoff meeting, and everybody interested in the project was actually at this meeting, and we were there for 2 or 3 days. Everybody built their models, and when the tender documents, when everyone had to produce the tender documents, they came back from this BIM kickoff meeting and they produced their documents. So that's an instance where, from day one, everybody who was bidding on a job was there at that BIM kickoff meeting. That's really, I think, the biggest experience I've had with it, and it was. I actually said this coming back to that it was like looking at the future. I don't think anybody there had any kind of 2D drawing whatsoever. Everybody was in BIM. We were collaborating all of our models, and everything that every trade was proposing was put into Navisworks and BIM site, and we resolved at the very beginning, before any of the contracts were awarded, some of the problems and what everybody kind of had to look out for. So it was really interesting.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Adil Chafi, George Brown College. On the delivery system, I think it's the main issue that the project delivery system, we want to work with the traditional system at the same time, working with the BIM, and it's not going to be compatible. I know the files are not compatible, but eventually with the advancement of technology and working hard in a collaboration system, we're going to get there. But the base, I believe, it's the execution plan, the project execution plan, where we have to take like CCDC involved in these, like can get committees on that in order for the different disciplines to be integrated, more effectively. So it's the base of the CCDC involvement into this system and having the project execution plan, which, it's for individual firms, they come up with their different, system of handling the project.
Yeah, I agree, Ali, with that. And someone mentioned it too earlier, that there's a BIM execution plan, but there does need to be someone like an intermediate person or team who can sort of oversee those relationships. How does the information flow at a high level? But there has to be that person, because who's going to do it? Someone from the architect? Are they paid? Is it in their interest to do it? And does the contractor want to be told how they're going to model, or the fabricator? So you do need that kind of neutral party to oversee that if possible. But again, like these guys have been saying, IPD and even internal IPD design builds and that, the future is now. They're all collaborating in a room, projectors, clients come in, projecting it online, sharing online. So it is happening. It's just the interests. That's the tough part.
Good. So we're coming rapidly to the end of our roundtable session. So just quickly, a snapshot. Can you think of a word to describe BIM in the future? 10 years out, 15 years out?
Communication.
Chris?
I think I was going to say communication, so.
Good. 2 for communication, that's good.
Sorry. I guess integration, I guess, in a word. I can elaborate on that. But.
Synonyms for communication.
Claudio?
Technical advancement.
Reid?
Most of my buzzwords were taken earlier, so I think the future is something where you just have a constant flow of information, and everyone's able to dip their hand into that flow, sort of thinking it like a stream of water, and pull out what they need and make use of that, and then contribute back so the next person has access to that information.
George?
I'm just looking up the thesaurus here to see can I find another word. Maybe I'll say integration too as well.
Yeah, I think clearly communication integration would be something we'd all do a big nod for, I think. So on behalf of CanBIM, thank you to our panel for your time, Jay, Chris, Claudio, Reid, and George. We know you've got busy schedules. I think we've all benefited from your words today, and thank you again. So